Hey everybody and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to walk through a couple of different things with the new SAP Build Apps, or Appgyver as it was formerly known, platform. Now, the main things I'm going to focus on here are most of the similarities. I've had people in past Appgyver and SAP Build App videos comment and basically just ask, how do you do this in the new version? So I'm going to walk through a couple of things. Now, before we get started, I'm going to walk through some actual free resources. These are things you don't need to pay for. So getting started, we have the Codeless Fix website. It's my website. So we have some app templates and there are some free downloads that you can actually work with. Now, I do also have in the store some purchased downloads. Basically, you download the Appgyver file, import it into Appgyver, and then you can work with it on your end. Now, another important thing is under video tutorials, I have a very lengthy list of video tutorials that I've made. All of them are on YouTube, so all of them free access. But I will also put a link to this specific playlist, which is my Appgyver playlist over on YouTube. So basically, you'll be able to see all of these different videos. Some of them are several years old, but the majority of the content is still going to be relevant. For example, I have this video here on using the Appgyver API. So let's jump into the Coffee Canine app that I made in a previous video or playlist. It was titled How to Make a Social or Sharing App, or something similar. But basically, we have the app here. So a couple of things to note. When it comes to the API, there's a couple of different things you can do to access and modify. First is you can add logic to something like a button. So if we select this button, you'll see that we have a page variable here, and we have an assigned value. So what we're doing here, you'll see we have a formula, and we're checking a data variable to see if it matches something. Now, again, depending on the page that you're looking at, you may have different options and choices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the post page, because this page actually has a couple of different bits of functionality, but I'm going to cover a couple of things. First things first, I'm going to cover just the basics. So we have all of this flow logic, which can get a little bit confusing as you kind of go through the various processes. But what I'm noting here is through all of this logic, one function that will remain the same, or has for me at least, is the get record function. Now, you'll see in this marketplace, I have some components that need to be updated, including get record. So I'm going to go ahead and update these very, very quickly, just to show that although sometimes things can change, the majority of the actual content won't. So the UI may change a bit. For example, when I select a component on the page, there was an update to things like this little pop-up dialog here in the past. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of just kind of double checking some of the functionality on a couple of different pages. Now, I did want to go ahead and actually jump in and just show the get record before I go into the rest of the video, since I did just update that. So on page layout, there's quite a few different things here. We have the get record function. Now you can see in the function itself that we have the profile details, which is currently bound to the data resource. And then you'll see that we have the ID here. But as far as the functionality itself, the menus layout, what it's tied to, are all pretty much identical, if not the exact same. And you have your outputs and things of that nature here. So no major changes to this. Now, we have a couple of different things here. This, I think, might actually be a different button, but I wanted to focus on, firstly, the HTTP request. So the HTTP request here, you'll see that there's actually not much that has changed in the new version of Appgyver. So, for example, in this video here that I went through, you'll see that I went through the process of updating a couple of different things, such as posting information. So I'll mute this, but just you'll see that this is the interface from 3 years ago or so. And if you go through, you can see that we wanted to, for example, post or add different logic to buttons. So you'll see that the interface, very, very similar. And then as we scroll through, you can see the process of adding different fields, logging into Firebase, and things of that nature. Now, specifically adding in the HTTP request details. So this was the content I was adding. And typically in most of these, when you click more, there'll be information on the URL, the posts, etc. But the idea is this is the body of what I was sending. And you'll see that I go through and update it based on this post request information here. So what we can do is we can check that, but then we can also check the different functions related to the post request. So we'll go back to Appgyver, and you'll see here we have our button and all of the different information over here. So first, you'll see that we have the post URL, which hasn't changed. It's post URL. Project name, post URL 2. Basically, I've built out a more dynamic URL. And if we go to this video, you'll see we have URL part 1, part 2, etc. So the general idea is the URL field has not changed. This is where your data is going. You can structure that however you want. Your HTTP method shouldn't change with any of the updates. It's the same type of request. And then you have a couple of additional options. So for example, we have optional inputs, and here you have your headers or your request body. Now, typically for a GET request, there is no request body. You're just pulling the data. But if you wanted to do something like, for example, delete, you have options to view specific components. Now, if you want to do other types of data requests, again, this is another GET request, same structure and setup because it's a GET request, but then you'll see that we have other additional options here. So now we're going to go to some of the actual post requests, like this submit one. Now this is very complex, so don't worry about all the specifics. I'm just highlighting how, for example, the delete method, very similar to a GET. No specific information, it's just delete and your URL. Again, I've built out all of these in past videos, so you can check out the various links because this hasn't actually changed. Now we have another delete option here, a couple of toast messages, and then you'll see that as we scroll through, now we have a post method. Again, the URL is the same, basically just creating the URL. It could be Firebase, whatever database you're looking to use. So the idea is this is the actual location to post to, the method, which is post, headers if you need any authentication or anything like that, and then your request body. Now, as you can see, this is a very large request body, and I have other videos on making this, but you'll notice that this looks very familiar to what we were just looking at here. So as I was going through the actual post request in this video, the content was very similar as far as setting up the login page, disabling authentication, and the post request, which you'll see I just pulled from Firebase here, and put directly into Appgyver. And I just edited the content. So that actually hasn't changed at all in the new version. You can just save all of that, choose your request body type, and update your application. So that covers posting and deleting in the flow functions. Now I want to cover it in the integration section. Now you'll notice that there's a couple of different things, like it'll show you that it's removing different things if you're not using them anymore. You'll see that there's no integration specifically, and then you'll see all of these. So these are data entities, which is different. So if you want to add an integration, they're not currently available in the community edition, so you can see about getting access. But what I typically have done in most of my past videos is add a data entity. Basically, when you go to create a data entity, you have the options for the REST API, OData integration, Google Firebase, and market search. Now you can use Google Firebase and have more of a easy to use setup. So what's the name, collection name, all of the details here. I've always been preferable to using the actual REST API integration. So you'll see we have all of the different things here that you would want to update. For example, do you want to create or update or replace or delete? So as you're scrolling through, although these different methods are a little bit newer, it's still very, very similar to some of the past videos that I've done actually setting up the various Appgyver data resources. So, for example, I have a video in the tutorials section closer to the bottom where some of the newer content is, with cleaning API responses and a couple of other relevant videos. Now, in the How to Clean API Responses video, you'll see a version of the Appgyver UI that's a bit older. So we have the base, get, post, put, delete. When we go to the current version, so if we go to create data entity and we go to universal, you'll see that we have the list option, then we have retrieve, then we have create, update, replace, delete. So very similar function. The idea here is when you go in and you look at the relative path and query, you'll see right here whatever that relative path is. And here it gives you a tooltip that says this has query parameters. So the idea here is in additional input in the base tab, basically just what do you need for this? To relate this to the past Appgyver UI, you'll see that the relative path was just the first portion of the URL, and then however you want to define the remainder. Then you have your response key path, which we would sometimes put something like document, data item, etc., and then your headers. So we can go back to our Appgyver field here. You'll see we have the relative path and query. You'll see we have the request method, which we have here, request headers, body, and then our response mapper, which you can set up here. So general idea is most of this is the same. When we go to test, for example, you can run test, you can auto detect schema from response, you can go to the schema area and work with things here and choose to save the data entity. And again, you can turn on whatever you need. Do you need to use delete or just the list, etc. But the general idea is you get to choose and modify everything here. And again, this is very similar. If I go full screen on this video, you can see that as I was working through, we have the test, we have the ability to set the schema from the response, and then you can finally build in those data variables. So once you've basically saved that entity, you can go into your app, and again, you can always go through and edit. As you can see, these were made in past videos, so you can go through and basically just look at your old content. So if it was already made and then you have the new Appgyver version, basically you can see all of that content here. You can see the config, you can see how it's laid out, you can see the get record, you can see the get record post, update put, the delete. You can see all of that in this editor here, and it is basically identical as far as how it actually functions to how things work here with just some minor changes. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below, and I'll see you all in the next video.